Well, good evening. Tonight is May the 23rd, 2023. We're continuing our weekly Bible study as we look at Daniel chapter 2. We've entitled this series of lessons, Why Bible Prophecy Matter. Many may think that, understanding Bible prophecy is of no concern to them. But then we kind of subtitled it, The End of Sin and Sinners. Think about that. There is going to come a day and time that will begin in all eternity where the end of sin and sinners, will begin. That is what heaven will be like. That is being in the presence of God. It will be the culmination of all that Christ died for on the cross, all that he rectified through his death on the cross. That's why Bible prophecy matters, not only for the motivation of us understanding that a day and time is going to come when sin and the sinners in will come. Certainly hell will have its field, if you will, with those, but as it relates to heaven, as it relates to God, as it relates to being in his presence, the end of sin and sinners will begin. I also wanted to teach this series because I know over 20 years ago when I taught our church through the book of Revelation, there are a lot of things that I said over 20 years ago that I'm not being prophetic. I'm just saying those things have come to pass. And through this study, you'll see it when they start talking about the alignment of 10 nations in the book of Revelation, as well as you see it in the book of Daniel, when President Ronald Reagan was in office, and he said, as it relates to that wall in Berlin, tear down this wall, and that was no longer East or West Berlin, that actually fulfilled the Bible prophecy of having the remaining 10 nations. So it's a lot of reasons why one would want to know Bible prophecy, not to sound smart or to sound intellectual, because there's a lot of Bible prophecy that I don't know. It will probably come, you'll probably see it as we get through this lesson, but hopefully we'll do our due diligence and be able to deal with your questions when we finish our study each week. So as we're going to be looking at Daniel chapter 2 tonight, I want to make certain my screen is available so we can do Daniel chapter 2 tonight. We're going to be reading from Daniel chapter 2 and trying to give you a connection of the book of Daniel. When we talk about Shadrach, Meshach, and three boys getting thrown in the fiery furnace, that's all connected with Daniel's. When we talk about Daniel in the lion's den, certainly that has to do with Daniel in the book of Daniel. But if you don't know how to put it all together, if you don't know how one connects with the other, you'll think that it has nothing to do with anything when it actually has everything to do with everything. That's the beautifulness about the 66 books that we have. It's one story. I oftentimes ask, why aren't there more books, or, why aren't some more books that I added that some guys wrote? Because it's one story. From Genesis to Revelation, it tells one story of redemption. From Genesis to Revelation, one interrupted story of redemption. Many of those other books that people like to say should be in the Bible, they actually do not complement or add to the one story from Genesis to Revelation. That's another reason why many books are not in the Bible, outside of being canonized, outside of being approved, outside of being inspired by God to be written. But what they talk about actually brings confusion to the one story from Genesis to Revelation, instead of complementing, the story from Genesis to Revelation. And so I just want to try and help us to kind of understand it So, around about Thanksgiving, when you're sitting around the dinner table at Thanksgiving, you can sound super smart with some stuff that you heard throughout this series. Again, why Bible prophecy? My opening statement says this. From the book of Daniel, we learn of the judgment of sinners and the completeness of judgment. You say, well, how is that? Yeah, in the book of Daniel, we learn of the judgment of sinners and the completeness of judgment. So how can, in an Old Testament book, that was written when it was written, how can we learn about the completeness of judgment? I'm glad you asked, and as we read chapter 2 of the book of Daniel, we're going to see how that happens and how God moved upon Daniel, this extraordinary prophet, to write things that actually address the completeness of judgment. Continuing on, the book of Daniel contains some of the most remarkable prophecies in the Bible. Prophecies that are detailed in content and in a broad scope, stretching from Daniel's time to the day of the Messiah's second coming. As someone said, Daniel wrote history more accurately before it happened than anyone has ever done after it happened. Did you get that? Daniel wrote more accurately as it relates to prophecy before it happened than people who have experienced the things, after it happened. That speaks to Daniel. That speaks to how God, no doubt, moved in the life of Daniel so that Daniel would be the one to do the things that God inspired him to write. My opening thought says this: no serious Bible student can afford to not have a basic understanding about Bible prophecy. And a great place to start with understanding prophecy is with this, the book of Daniel, that talks about the forgotten dream of Nebuchadnezzar and Daniel, the unforgettable prophet. Daniel was a man for a time of crisis. He was composed and courageous. His relationship with God was strong, as we can see by his communion with God in prayer. Daniel had the right attitude toward others, and it was revealed by his compassion and humility. Daniel was a rare man, and that's why God used him the way he did. Daniel was a choice servant. And so I need to read some verses of Daniel chapter 2, and I don't know how far I need to read because that depends on how far we're going to go. But especially for our virtual audience at home, they may not be sitting still with their Bibles open like you are, all who are here. And so I want them to at least hear these words. Daniel chapter 2. It says, now in the second year of the reign of Nebuchadnezzar had dreams, plural, and his spirit was troubled, and his sleep left him. Then the king gave orders to call the magicians, the conjurers, the sorcerers, and the Chaldeans to tell the king his dreams. So they came in and stood before the king. The king said to them, I had a dream. I like to stop, kind of pause when I say that, I had a dream, and my spirit is anxious to understand the dream. Then the Chaldeans spoke to the king in Aramaic, O king, live forever. Tell the dream to your servants, and we will declare the interpretation. The king replied to the Chaldeans, the command from me is firm. If you do not make known to me the dream and its interpretation, I don't know if you guys got that. The king will say, I'm not going to even tell you what a dream. Remember, you are the sorcerers, you're the magicians, you are the dream interpreters, you're the ones who read horoscopes. Okay, y'all gonna catch up with me a little bit. Yeah, you're the one who depends on all of this, so this is what I'm gonna do. I'm not going to even tell you the dream, but I need you to tell me the dream and interpret it, because you claim, and for all these years you've been interpreting stuff, you claim that you can do that. Notice what he says. If you do not make known to me the dream and the interpretation, you will be torn limb from limb, and your houses will be made a rubbish heap. I think everybody in the dream interpreting business should have quit their jobs that day, right? That'll catch up with y'all. You know, all them 800 numbers y'all be dialing, that'll catch up with y'all. Verse 6. But if you declare the dream and its interpretation, you will receive from me gifts and a reward and great honor. Therefore, declare to me the dream and its interpretation. They answered a second time and said, let the king tell the dream to his servants, and then we will declare the interpretation. I mean, just tell it to us, and we promise you we'll, interpret it. The king replied, I know for certain that you are bargaining for time, inasmuch as you have seen that the command from me is firm. In other words, he ain't changed his mind. Verse 9, that if you do not make the dream known to me, there is only one decree for you. For you have agreed together to speak lying and corrupt words before me until the situation is changed. Therefore, tell me the dream that I may know that you can declare to me its interpretation. The Chaldeans answered the king and said, man, there ain't a man on earth. That's literally what the verse says. There's not a man on earth who could declare the matter for the king, inasmuch as no great king or ruler has ever asked such a thing like this of any magician, conjurer, or what? Chaldean. Moreover, the thing which the king demands is difficult, and there's no one else who could declare to the king except God's, whose dwelling place is not with mortal flesh. Because of this, the king became indignant and very furious and gave orders to destroy all the wise men of Babylon. Now, you got to know a little history about this. And I'll try to give it to you in the big scope, and then I'll get more specific later. They would go to Jerusalem and get the brightest and the smartest young men, bring them to Babylon, capture them, bring them to Babylon, leaving the people in Jerusalem, bring them to Babylon. They would train these young men of their ways. They would change their name. They would teach them, all of their stuff, if you will, in hopes of using them to go back and lead the people of Jerusalem away from God. Y'all, that's why Daniel is in Babylon. He was about 15 years old when he got took to Babylon. Stayed there after in his 80s. That's why Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, the boys who got thrown in the fire furnace, who were like teenagers in their early 20s when they got captured, that's why they're there. That's why their names get changed. I think we'll see them later in this particular chapter. So you got to understand, the king has, Nebuchadnezzar, he has a Babylon. He's been working a system, if you will, to where they would incorporate people from Jerusalem, change their names, teach them their ways, and then go back and teach those things and those ways to the people of Jerusalem, that they would accept their ways. So they would live in serving the king, Babylon, instead of the true king, God, Jesus Christ. That's just kind of a short scope of why Daniel was in Babylon and why other men were in Babylon, if you were to read chapter 1. It says, so the decree went forth that the wise men should be slain, and they looked for Daniel and his friends to kill them. Then Daniel replied with discretion and discernment to Arioch, the captain of the king's bodyguard, who had gone forth to slay the wise men of Babylon. He said to Arioch, the king's commander, for what reason is this decree from the king so urgent? In other words, why is he killing all of the wise men of us? Then Arioch informed Daniel about the matter. So Daniel went in, and he requested of the king that he would give him time in order that he might declare the interpretation to the king. Notice it said interpretation. Verse 17. There they are, right there. Then Daniel went to his house and informed Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, because that's who names those are right there. Hananiah is Shadrach. Mishael is Shadrach, Meshach, and then Azariah is Abednego, the guys that we know of the other names that they have. He said, we'll go and inform his friends about the matter, so that they might request compassion from the God of heaven concerning this mystery. Because you got to remember, they know that Daniel and those boys once served the God, of heaven. And you remember early on when they first brought him over, they wanted him to eat their food. They said, we can't defile our bodies with that food. And they said, well, just let us eat the king, our, thing. And after 10 days, they came back second time. Those guys were looking real, real good. Come on, I know y'all studied the book of Daniel in Sunday school. I'm just giving you the story behind the book of Daniel that you never hear in Sunday school. Well, these guys, they said, well, we're going to look. And so they came back and they looked good. He said, okay, well, then you know what? I'll let you boys alone. Well, that's what's happening here. It says, so they might request compassion of God so that Daniel and his friends would not be destroyed with the rest of the wise men of Babylon. Daniel believes so much in God. You understand what's happening here? Daniel has been arrested as a 14, 15-year-old kid, dragged into Babylon, taught all of this stuff, forced to serve, forced to do these things, but he never once stopped doing the things he knew to serve his true God. That tells us, that almost speaks to the book of Romans where it says, as it relates to government, all right, surrender to the government, but not to the point that they cause you to what? Go against the things of God. And that's what Daniel did. Daniel never went against the things of God. Daniel would pray 3 times a day. Daniel would do all of the things that they told him not to. Read on a little bit, then we'll open up this thing. It says, then the mystery was revealed to Daniel in a night vision. Remember, he prayed to God for the interpretation. Then the mystery was revealed to Daniel in the night vision. Then Daniel blessed the God of heaven. Daniel said, let the name of God be blessed forever and ever, for wisdom and power belong to him. It is he who changes the time and the epochs. He, watch this now, removes kings and establishes kingdoms. He gives wisdom to wise men and knowledge to men of understanding. It is he, God, who reveals the profound and the hidden things. He knows what is in the darkness, and the light dwells with him. To you, O God of my father, I will give thanks and praise, for you have given me the wisdom and power. Even now you have made known to me, what we requested of you, for you have made known to us the king's matter. And I guess I'll stop there for tonight. If we can get that far. So you got the story. Daniel and other little young men have been taken captive. They've been over in Babylon under King Nebuchadnezzar. They've been taught their ways and all of that. But Daniel, along with his friends, because you got to remember, evidently, they've been watching Daniel because Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, remember, they would not bow down and worship the king, remember? That's the reason why they got thrown in the fiery furnace. So they work within the confines of their allegiance and obligation to government, but not to the point that they would sin against God. I think that's a lesson for us all, ladies and gentlemen. See, we'll attach ourselves to a party or a person, and we'll forget that that party or that person is engaging in things that we are giving hearty approval to, Romans chapter 1, that do what? Go totally against what God says. But out of some commitment to a party or a person, will sin against God. See, those are not good servants. We wonder why God did what he did with Daniel. It wasn't because Daniel was lucky. You got to remember, Daniel was faithful to God throughout the whole beginning, from the beginning to the end. Let me read some commentary. Then we'll give you an outline and we'll kind of walk through this. Reading the commentary. In Daniel chapter 2, God gave King Nebuchadnezzar a dream. Remember, God gave King Nebuchadnezzar a dream to communicate God's timeline for human history. I don't know, I got to pause there. I don't know if you got it. That dream that King Nebuchadnezzar had, it wasn't because he had had pizza and spaghetti and his stomach was upset and he just had a weird dream, because you do know what you eat sometimes determines, your stomach, anyhow. It's been proven medically for that, So it wasn't that King Nebuchadnezzar had some bad pizza and he had a bad dream, because if you remember, go all the way back to verse 1, he had many dreams. Matter of fact, let's back up to that in chapter 2. I think it says it somewhere that he had many, there it is right there, verse 1. Now in the second year of the reign of Nebuchadnezzar, Nebuchadnezzar had dreams, plural. So he was having a lot of dreams. It wasn't the first time he had a dream. But this particular dream troubled him. He woke up and he couldn't sleep no more the rest of the night. Now, you wonder what happened. I'm glad you said, because that same God that we're talking about, what he literally did with King Nebuchadnezzar is because he's actually going to talk, because King Nebuchadnezzar at that time was sort of like the reigning world power. And when you get to seeing how this goes down from the Medo-Persian, the Greco-Romans, Medo-Persians, Egypt, the Greco-Romans, all of these world powers, when you understand this timeline, because when Jesus is on the earth, the Greco-Persians, the Babylonians, the Egyptians, the Assyrians, all of those people, they have lost their world power dominance. And who's in world power then? Rome. And you're going to see Rome in Daniel's chapter 2. So I go back to that initial point that I made. It says Daniel wrote history more accurately before it happened than anyone has ever done after it happened. Are you understanding what I'm saying? I'm going to take my time with this series, because I don't want to run you through it. I want to point out some things that I believe if you can hear some of the things that we're saying, they'll give clarity to some of the things we're seeing and have heard or maybe misunderstood over the years. So back to the commentary. God gave Nebuchadnezzar a dream to communicate his timeline, not Nebuchadnezzar's, but God's timeline for human history. So what are you talking about? From where Nebuchadnezzar was at, that dream he had literally fulfills all the way to the second coming of Christ. Y'all not praying with me tonight. It includes the rapture and all those things, but the second coming of Christ. And every world power, including the stuff we're seeing today, is mentioned right there in Daniel's chapter 2. I say again, Daniel wrote more accurately about history before it happened than folk are writing about history since it has happened. These are the things that will help you be motivated in surrendering your faith and your belief in the things of God. But if the only thing we're teaching in church is God wants you happy, he wants to deal with your anxiety and all that stuff. Reading on. It says, the meaning and interpretation of the dream gives us encouragement and hope that God is very soon about to establish his eternal kingdom forever. My hope and prayer are that the studies that we will examine will provide the framework for eschatology. I know y'all know what that is, but that means end time things, things in the end, eschatology. And will lay the foundation for even deeper studies of prophecies, both in Daniel and Revelation. So let's consider a couple of the things about this extraordinary and exceptional prophet. Daniel, in 605 BC, Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, he conquered the city of Jerusalem. So that's some of the things I talked about here. So now you have it in written form. The capital of the nation of Judah. He removed the Judean king, Jehoiakim, and replaced him with his 18-year-old son, Jehoiakim. Now, watch this. He let a Jew stay in charge, but he took the daddy out and he put the son in. I just let that pause for a little while. That'll catch up with you. Anyhow, he replaced him with his 18-year-old son, Jehoiakim. 8 years later, when Jehoiakim also rebelled against Nebuchadnezzar, they invaded Judah again. He conquered Jerusalem a second time. And now he replaced Jehoiakim with his uncle, Zedekiah. You got to remember, Babylon had no problem with Judah or Jerusalem having their own people kind of over them, but because they were the dominant world power, they were over them. It's like having your own puppet master, in charge of all the rest of the puppets. And when they rebel, then you snatch them out. That's what was taking place. 10 years later, after Zedekiah had been placed in office, when Zedekiah revived the rebellion, Nebuchadnezzar invaded a third time. And he decided he was fed up with the Jewish rebellion. And so in 587 BC, the Babylonians totally destroyed the city of Jerusalem, including Solomon's temple, and ended the Davidic line of kings. Each of the 3 times Nebuchadnezzar invaded Judah and conquered Jerusalem, he took captives back to Babylon. After the first invasion of 605 BC, he took only a handful of Jewish captives. These consisted of the sons of the elite Jewish ruling class, and one of those was who? Daniel. So in those invasions, when they were, taking down Jerusalem and putting what they thought puppet kings in charge, you got to understand that was a purpose behind everything that he had did. Reading on, and then I'll do the outline. Let me read the rest of it. Daniel was about 15 years old at this time. But Daniel had distinguished himself immediately as a person of spiritual maturity. Did you get that? Anybody in here 15 years old tonight? See, you don't have to be, you know what I'm saying, 108 years old to be mature in the things of God. But you also have to have been taught the things of God, and that's one of the reasons why, I even talked with our director of youth. I said, listen, I know y'all doing this other program, but I don't want you to get away from the catechisms. I don't want you to get away from the catechism. Our kids need to understand who God is, what he did, what sin is, how did he die for us, why did he die for us, and all of those questions about did God create sin, all these things that the catechism teaches, because as you teach them to them as a little children, we just talked about that last week, you put a defense in them for when they get older. But if they can't even defend what they claim to believe, as a teenager, then they will be more inclined to be drawn into the things of the world and then staying faithful to the word of God. Well, by the time Daniel was 15 years old, Daniel's so committed to this thing, he sold out. And you got to understand, they didn't live across the track, in the hood, and so they were so dependent upon God. If you read the story, Daniel's family was an elite family. They had money. They had means. So here we have Daniel's family with means, but yet they love and serve God so much that they would teach their children, even though they were a family of means, to honor God. As a result of that, Daniel and many of the elite people from the family were taken captive, and they were taken to Babylon, and they were trained in the things of King Nebuchadnezzar. So it says, Daniel was about 15 years old. He distinguished himself by refusing to pollute himself with the non-kosher food supplied to him by the king. I told that story. In similar manner, many years later, people don't know the difference between when he refuses himself to eat the food. And then when this happened, he's 82 years old. When Daniel is imperiled his life by refusing to obey an order of King Darius at that time of the Medo-Persian Empire, because now the Babylonian Empire has been taken captive by the Medo-Persian Empire, that no one could pray for 30 days, because that was an edict or an order by the king Darius, that no one could pray for 30 days to any god except to the king himself. Well, Daniel's refusal to abide by this command prompted the king to throw him into a lion's den, but his life was spared by a miracle of God. So, ladies and gentlemen, what we're dealing with here is one of the most remarkable men revealed in Scripture. But you got to understand, the way he was able to be such a choice servant for God, it wasn't by luck, it wasn't by association, it wasn't by affiliation, it was by what? Maturation. It was by him hearing the word of God, believing the word of God, and adhering to the word of God, being obedient as it relates to the things of God, being obedient to the point that he would not even eat non-kosher food. He wouldn't eat the food of the Gentiles. He would only eat the food, the non-kosher food that he had been brought up on. So we see this commitment in this man, but yet we see and we wonder why, from 15 to 82, I can't do the math, but y'all, that's a long time of this man being faithful. So when he is challenged with this at age 82, Daniel's like, whatever, I'm going to pray every day as I've been doing. And we know, as we said, how this thing worked out. So when we get to looking at this particular, just an overview, again, I'm giving you the big parts of it. Next week, we're going to kind of break it down a little bit. We see how early on in Daniel chapter 2, that's the part I want to see, how Nebuchadnezzar's gathered what we're going to call the experts. Now, I kind of want to tell you who they are. Let's see, what verse would that be in, where he started naming the magi's, the sorcerers and all that. That would be, find the verse for me. I think that's somewhere close to the top, though. Yeah, there it is. Is it 2 or 3? Go to verse 2. Daniel chapter 2, something like that. Yeah, there we go. Okay. It says, then the king gave orders to call the magicians. Now, let me tell you who the magicians were. The magicians, that word magicians, as you know, Hebrew, the magi's, and when Jesus, the magicians is a Hebrew term that refers to fortune tellers. It also can refer to scholars. In other words, people who've been highly educated in ancient societies. And y'all, it wasn't unusual to see these roles combined together. It wasn't unusual. It wasn't unusual. Matter of fact, I'll show you something in a little bit. So you have the astrologers in there. These were the stargazers who charted the positions of the stars like the wise man when Jesus is born. And they tried to determine people's destinies based on how the stars were aligned or arranged, much like what horoscopes claim to do today. Sorcerers, these were the spiritualists, the enchanters who were mediums who attempted to talk to the dead. And then these Chaldeans, originally from Babylonia, the Chaldeans eventually rose to a place in prominence, if you will, in the courts of Babylon under Nabopolassar, I always say his name wrong, which is actually Nebuchadnezzar's father. So Nebuchadnezzar's father, Nabopolassar, I know I'm saying that wrong, but something like that. He himself gave rise, if you will, to these Chaldeans who supposedly were the wisest and most knowledgeable men in both arts and science. And so when Nebuchadnezzar has had this disturbing dream, this majorly disturbing dream, he can't figure out what it is. So he calls in, if you will, the experts. He calls in the experts. I wrote something. I want to make sure that I talk about this tonight because I don't want this to become a question of got so many notes here. God had, it wasn't unusual, let me say it like that, for God to reveal himself or what he wanted to people through dreams. That wasn't unusual. Now, I tell you what, it is unusual today. I can't find it right now, but please go, I think it's Hebrews 1. Go to Hebrews 1, verse 1 and 2. It is today. Why is it today? Because God would use that as prophetic because the Bible had not been written. What God wanted to make known, it had been written. It hadn't been written. So God would reveal to whom he would choose certain men to reveal, things that he would want to be made known. But Hebrews chapter 1, verse 1 and 2, notice what it says. God, this is New Testament, after he spoke long ago to the fathers and prophets in many portions and many ways, and you know what those many ways was? Go back to verse 1, dreams. He spoke to many, in verse 1, he spoke to many in many different ways. He spoke to them through dreams, one time he spoke through a donkey, he spoke through all kinds, God, because he was establishing, he was making known all that we need to make known. That's why when you get to Revelation chapter 22, I think verse 18 and 19, the last few words, it says, curse the one who adds anything to this Bible and curse anyone who takes anything away from it. Because basically he's saying, ain't nothing else need to be said. That's what this verse means. He says that. So he goes, verse 2, thank you. He said, I testify to everyone who hears the word of prophecy in this book. If anyone adds to them, God will add to them the plagues which are what? Written in this book. And if anyone takes away from the words of the book of prophecy, God will take away his part from the tree of life and the holy city which are written in the book. Now, what do you think that tells me as a preacher or pastor? I ain't got nothing else to preach but what the word is. I don't get up here and talk about anything outside of the word. If I'm smart, he will kill if I take away, and he will kill if I add. So while we are Bible teaching church, if anybody want to know, you tell them that right there. You tell them that right there. And I just get blown away at the brass of some preachers and teachers and pastors saying things that are not in the Bible. Have they not read the Bible? Do they not know what this verse says? These two verses say. So I don't have no choice. I may use metaphors, applications, but all of those things should be based on what God has said in his word and not something outside of it. One of the reasons why I started the other ministry parachurch ministry I have now, servants, where I train nothing and talk to nothing but senior pastors and, their wives and their leadership. And we go around because I take people back to the Bible. Listen, I know you're being moved and led because you're looking at the church down the street that have a whole bunch of members in it, and he never preaches from the Bible. God, read Revelation 22, 18, and 19. So now back to Hebrews chapter 1, verse 2. He said, after God has spoken all these things, look what Hebrews chapter 1, verse 2 said. Hebrews chapter 1, verse 2. We read verse 1. But notice what it said. It says, in these last days, and can I tell you when the last days began? The day of Jesus Christ's ascension. In these last days, God has spoken to us in his Son, whom he appointed heir of all things, through whom also what? He made the world. Y'all, there is no need for God to speak to us in a dream about anything in his word. He ain't doing that no more. And I know a whole lot of Christians spend a whole lot of time trying to interpret a dream. And I'm like, what is even the use for it if you're a Christian? We're living our life to serve God. We believe in his sovereignty. We believe in the providence. Are we going to now let a dream dictate what we do and how we function? Because as you saw way back then, the type of people who were engaging in dream interpretations. And as we find out and as we discover, y'all, most of those folk are lying. Literally. And that's why when King Nebuchadnezzar says, okay, I tell you boys what, I need you to interpret the dream, and I ain't going to even tell you what the dream is. Now that's cold right there. I believe, as it says later, how God picks kings and all that stuff, and he replaces them and stuff like that. Nebuchadnezzar was in the place at the time serving God's purpose, even with the dream, serving God's purpose. Even with all the stuff that he would do, serving God's purpose. Would rid the country of all of those sorcerers and serving God's purpose. And then Daniel, who was one of them, say, you know what? Hey, let me go talk to God. I believe in God. I don't believe that God has brought us here for me to die at the hands of these people behind this. And then God reveals the dream to him. And we're going to touch on that just a little bit, just to make y'all want to come back next week. Just to make y'all want to come back next week. So, we can find how this is divided into 4 categories. The times of the Gentiles, the triumph of Jesus Christ, the terror of the Antichrist, the triumph of Jesus Christ, and then the timing of the Lord's return. So what am I talking about? The dream that Nebuchadnezzar had, that Daniel's interpret for him, literally covers the times of the Gentiles, the terror of the Antichrist. Now, you remember the times of the Gentiles, just from my Bible students, you know, when the Jews would not do what God wanted them to do. You know, we've been preaching that through the Gospel of Luke, right? When they've been disobeying God, turning away from God, when they wouldn't do what he wanted to do and what God wanted them to do, God, I showed you in the Bible, God says what he'd do with that nation. He would set that nation aside, and he would go after who? The Gentiles. Matter of fact, in Luke chapter 12 and 13, where we're preaching that on Sundays now, the Jews, they can't believe that it's going to be Gentiles in heaven. A lot of them thought because of the stuff that they were doing, you know, that they automatically merited heaven based on being Jews. And that's why when that verse, when it says in Luke, he says, and they were saying, you know, let us in. And then Jesus said, no, I never knew you, in so many words. And they said, well, wait a minute, hold on, let me understand something. Are Gentiles going to heaven? Yeah. Because after Peter, which is why I'm just so convicted in regards to race, relationships, and all this type of stuff. We got to get beyond this stuff. Peter, even after he had preached at Pentecost, by the time he's in the 7th and 8th chapter, after Stephen has gotten martyred or killed, Stephen, can I bosterize it? Peter is only going across the track when he can sneak across the track. Nobody see him. Eat them pork chops with them Gentiles and all that, go to the hood and all that. Then he sneak back and go and hang out with the Jews. One time he got caught. Because Peter still was packing what? Prejudice. And I preach against it every time I can open up my mouth. Peter was still prejudiced in a sense. So God could not fully use Peter and his prejudices. So he raised up a man named Saul, and turned his name to Paul. The reason why Peter, who became the head of the church, couldn't go much further, you got to read chapter 7, 8 in the book of Acts. He still got prejudices. God ain't going to set me aside because of prejudices. I guarantee you that. So he raises up this other Gentile guy who's not only Gentile, but he's a Jew of Jews, he's Gentiles, and Paul got all kind of pedigree. I said pedicure. You got me thinking about getting my feet fixed. I ain't doing no pedicure. Anyhow, his pedigree. Paul has a lot of pedigree, right? And so God uses him. And then you see Paul, he goes once he has been set down and God has revealed himself and spoken to him and showed him himself. Paul goes primarily to the Gentiles, establishing even greater the times of the Gentiles. Y'all, it is still the time of the Gentiles. And the Bible's going to show us in Revelation that after the church has been raptured and all of that stuff, and then God will draw the Jews back to Jerusalem. How he's going to draw them back to Jerusalem? Just like what you're seeing happening today. You get to destroying other parts of the world and all that. The Jews whom he scattered, God said he would bring them back. And he's doing it. They're doing right now, they're building homes in Jerusalem to accommodate the return of the Jews who are going to come back to Jerusalem. They think it has to do with, let me say it like this. They think it just happened to do with circumstances and situations, but it's God creating the fulfillment of the book of Revelation that he spoke of in Daniel. So after the church is raptured and other parts of the world are destroyed and Jews have been forced back, they rebuild Jerusalem, they rebuild the temple, they go back in the Old Testament sacrifice work. Yeah, all of that stuff happens again. That's the time after the times of the Gentiles. And then guess what happens during that time? An Antichrist is going to raise up. And I taught y'all that. We saw that last year, how all these world religions are meeting and stuff like that. And from that going to raise an Antichrist who's going to come with some type of peaceful solution to war. To war. Ooh, that's interesting. To war. We got wars popping all over the world now. He's going to bring some peaceful solution to war, and everybody going to bow down to him and say, oh, well, great, he stopped all the wars. But then he's going to, because at that time, the temple will have been finished being rebuilt in Jerusalem, which they're rebuilding, and then he's going to move from a political guy to a religious guy. Sit on the throne and basically say, I'm God and show me the world. And that's when Jesus is going to say, you a lie, here I come. That's the time through the tribulation when so many things happen. Y'all, this is all in Daniel chapter 2. But you got to know what to look for. For the sake of time, I'm just going to give you this last part during the times of the Gentiles, verse 31 through 44. Matter of fact, let's read those. It says, you, O king, were looking, and behold, there was a single great statue. Remember, y'all, this is very important. Every word I say, read it. It's very important. A single great statue. The statue which was large and an extraordinary splendor. He described in his dream to him, Nebuchadnezzar's dream to him. I'm sorry, Daniel is describing Nebuchadnezzar's dream to himself. He was standing in front of you, and his appearance was awesome. The head of the statue was made of gold, which represents a nation. The breast of the arms of silver, which represents another nation. Its belly and its thighs was bronze, which represents another nation. Its legs of iron, its feet part of clay, and of iron and partly of clay, which represents another nation. You continue looking until a stone was cut out with hands, and it struck the statue on his feet of iron and clay and crushed them. Ooh, boy, time won't let me do it tonight. Then the iron, the clay, and the bronze, these are all nations, y'all. The silver and the gold were crushed all at the same time and became like chaff from the summer threshing floor, and the wind carried them away so that there was not a trace of them was found. What? All those nations have been destroyed? Yeah. But the stone that struck the statue became a great mountain and filled the whole earth. This was the dream. Now we will tell its interpretation before the king. You, O king, are the King of kings, to whom the God of heaven has given the kingdom, the power, and the strength, and the glory. And wherever the sons of men dwell, or the beasts of the field, or the birds of the sky, he has given them into your hands and has caused you to rule over them all. You are the head of gold that statue represents. After you, there will arise another kingdom inferior to you. Then a third kingdom of bronze, which will rule over, I just told y'all, Media, Persians, Greek, Romans, that's what all of these things are talking about, which will rule over. Then there will be a fourth kingdom as strong as iron, inasmuch as iron crushes and shatters all things, so like iron that breaks in pieces, it will crush and break all these in pieces. In that you saw the feet and toes, partly of the potter's clay and partly of iron. It will be a divided kingdom, but it will have in it the toughness of iron. A divided kingdom. Y'all are not hearing me tonight. Are y'all? A divided kingdom, but it will have in it the toughness of iron. Inasmuch you saw the iron mixed with the common clay. As the toes of the feet were partly of iron and partly of powder, some of the kingdom will be strong and part of it will be brittle. And in that you saw the iron mixed with the common clay, they will combine with one another in the seed of man, but they will not adhere to one another, even as iron does not combine with pottery. Last verse I'll read. In the days of those kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom which will never be destroyed. And that kingdom will not be left for another people. It will crush and put an end to all these kingdoms, but it itself will endure how long? Forever. Now quickly, as we go through the Gentiles of the time, I'll read this and we'll stop. Remember that statue that we read? And this will give you something to look at until next week. The head of gold represents Nebuchadnezzar and his Babylonian empire. The chest of silver is the kingdom that will supplant Babylon, which later identifies in chapter 8 as the Medo-Persia Empire. The thighs of bronze, the next kingdom in the series, which again Daniel identifies in chapter 8 as Greece. Ooh, man, because I've been to those places, it just legs of iron. The fourth kingdom in the series, which we know from history, was the Roman Empire. Legs of iron, Roman Empire, which ultimately splits into two parts. Then we have the feet of clay and iron, the Gentile empire of history, the unstable combination of clay with iron. Y'all, that alone speaks to something right there. You don't mix clay with iron. You don't mix clay with iron. But the unstable combination of clay with iron suggests a loose confederation of nations that will exist in the area of the old Roman Empire. Lastly, the supernatural stone that's spoken of is symbolic of the return of the Messiah, who would destroy the last Gentile kingdom and will put an end to Gentile rule by establishing what? The kingdom of God on earth. Y'all, just for record, and we'll show you when we get to walking through this thing, when it says in number 5, the feet of clay and iron, the last empire, the unstable combination of clay with iron suggests a loose confederation of nations. See, that's what I taught y'all when I showed y'all how these confederations of nations are coming together and saying, okay, well, we'll agree on one world religion, but we're going to take this out, we're going to take this out. That's called a loose confederation of nations. And ladies and gentlemen, that is taking place right now, today as we speak. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. God bless.